Hi everyone, and welcome back from Professional Experience. I hope you had the most sensational time while you're out on placement and that you were able to see a lot of the things that we've been talking about from a theoretical perspective in real life situations in schools with teachers and students working together in this magical process that we call learning. I hope that some of the strategies that we've been talking about in the second half of the semester have been things that you have been able to start to see and to implement as part of your own professional practices. And today in this lecture that I'm recording so that you're able to watch this at any point throughout this week is the last lecture in our lecture series for this particular unit. And it focuses on a really important aspect of our work as educators, and that is talking about inclusion. And like we've done with a lot of the weeks throughout this semester, I'm using a case study to illustrate a particular point. And so this week I'm talking about digital technologies and the ways in which teachers think or are able to think about using those for inclusion with a range of different students. So I hope that you enjoy our last lecture together, and as always, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them up on discussion forums or alternatively to ask people in your workshops and they'll be able to help you with those. So here we go. So the first thing to briefly go over is knowing why this focus of inclusion is important. Well, there are a range of different documents and elements of the education system here in Australia that do talk about the need for us to know about inclusion and how to start to conceptualise that. And as you progress through your Master of Teaching, you'll actually start to come across this notion of inclusion in a whole range of different units, and they will expand on some of these really basic ideas that I'm introducing here. But if you look at a number of the Australian professional standards for teachers, then you can see that we need to be able to work with a whole range of different students, people with different capacities, different backgrounds, and to be able to bring them into our classrooms and to allow them to engage with the materials that we are presenting. At the core of the Australian curriculum is the issue of equity. So the Australian curriculum has been designed with this notion of equity and inclusion as a core element of what it is that we do every day in classrooms with young people. So we have students that come from a range of different contexts, and they present in different ways with different needs. And it's really important to think that we're not just looking at a homogenous group of students who sit in front of us, that they actually have different needs and different capacities, and we need to be aware of all of those and to think about ways in which we might be able to bring them into the learning with all other students in our classes. At the core of everything that we do is the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Goals for Young Australians. And I'm sure that you're aware of that document. If you're not, then it's a really good idea to just Google that, and you'll see that there are some core principles that underpin all of Australian schooling. And so a national policy response to this notion of inclusion is evident in this particular document. So it's a national document. It lists major Australian educational goals, and one of those is to develop the life skills of confidently and creatively engaging with technology and solving problems across domains. And so what we find is that there's actually this imperative from the Australian government for teachers to be able to use digital technologies as part of their work with young people. And a lot of teachers have started to see that this may be a way to be able to include students from a whole range of diverse backgrounds to address some of these needs for inclusion. And if we actually start to have a look at the digital day that a number of the young people that you're going to be working with, what that looks like, then we can start to understand the place of digital technologies in education. Have a look at some of these stats. 1.86 billion active monthly users on Facebook. That's a lot of people. 66.1% of those people use Facebook every day. So you bet that a lot of the young people that you're going to be working with, even under the age of 13, which is actually the age that people are allowed to have their own Facebook account according to the terms of service of Facebook, a lot of those 1.86 billion active monthly users are under the age of 13. I wonder if you can have a guess who's going to have the most friends on Facebook, males or females? Well, here's the answer. So, females have more friends than males, and 91% of 15 to 31-year-olds use Facebook. Digital technologies are a big deal. In Australia, Facebook has 16 million subscriptions. So that's 65.3% of the population of this country have a Facebook account. Extraordinary numbers. The use of digital technologies is now very close to being ubiquitous. This is just one platform. If we look at another social media platform, not quite as popular, but Twitter has 310 million monthly active users. 2.8 million are from Australia. And 80% of those around the world access Twitter via mobile technologies, mobile phones or tablets. An incredible number, and a shift that, when you think about the fact that smartphones have only been around for a decade or so, that's an incredible shift. An incredible number of people using digital technologies, including young people. And if we actually start to have a look at the way smartphone use has increased, that's the blue line on this particular graph, the amount of smartphone use is absolutely huge, and it's increasing at a great rate, much more so than desktop machines, which are on the decline. Interestingly, tablet devices are staying relatively stable. And what are people doing with those? Well, Facebook is big, but I tell you what, YouTube's even bigger. A lot of people using YouTube. You might have heard of a number of these other sites. This is for Australia, and these are the number of unique people looking at different applications on mobile devices. One that you mightn't have heard of, Vivo. When you think about the statistics that I was just showing you about Facebook, and you have a look at Vivo, then there are a huge number of people using a whole range of different resources on their mobile devices. And so it's unsurprising, therefore, to find that we have all of these different images, all of these different things that consistently and constantly bombard us about the uses of digital technology, of the ways in which young people are so-called digital natives, an idea that I think is completely false. But these images are things that we are constantly being shown as teachers, that we're told students need technology in classrooms. We have had things in the Australian education landscape, like the digital education revolution, that indicate to us as teachers that digital technologies are a big deal, and they play a really important part in the education landscape. And as I said to you before, a lot of teachers are using that notion, that idea, as a way to be able to include students from diverse backgrounds. But for a moment, I just want us to stop and take a different perspective on educational technology and creativity and inclusion. And I want you to just for a moment start to think about things from a critical perspective. I want you to think about the question, does technology actually enhance learning? Does it actually improve learning? And there are a whole range of different academics in this particular faculty who've written a number of different books that actually question the use of digital technology in education, and to start to ask this very question, does technology enhance learning? It's a great question, but the answer isn't really that clear. And so instead of just trying to defend educational technologies or sit on the fence by saying, well, it kind of depends, let's have a very brief look at some of the evidence against educational technology, why maybe we should be thinking this might not be such a great idea. You'll see if you start reading in any of the literature around educational technologies, these kinds of phrases, computer-assisted learning or technology-enhanced learning. And if you start to look at those kinds of phrases and the language that's used, there's this implicit connection between technologies and an improvement in learning. There's no doubt that for example, in that second statement, that it's the technologies that enhance learning. That without those technologies, we have somehow this impoverished educational landscape. The man on the screen here is Seymour Papert, and he was one of the very first people to start to conceptualize the ways in which digital technologies might be used for young people in schools, and to think about ways in which we might design particularly for young people. And he talked in the early 1980s about the digitally driven blowing up of conventional schools. Steve Woolgar, a little bit later on in 2002, summed up a lot of this nicely by saying that there's this inherent implication that something new, something different, and usually something better is happening when we use digital technologies. And so what you can see on the screen here are the kinds of state-of-the-art examples that are often peddled by hardware and software companies as to the ways in which we should be talking about and using digital technologies in education. So on the top left is a screenshot from a game called World of Warcraft that you might have heard of. It's a massive multiplayer online game, and there have been literally tens of millions of people who've played this game. And there have been educational research that looks at the ways in which in this game teamwork, which is an essential element of this game. You can't actually succeed at the high levels of this game without being involved in a team. How the teamwork actually enhances personal literacy and communication skills. On the right hand side we have a 3D printer, and so there's been a whole lot of discussion about creativity, about a whole range of different thinking skills that can come from the use of 3D printers, and particularly from the design processes that are involved with 3D printing. And at the bottom, we have a screenshot from a virtual world where we can have people represented by avatars, and those avatars allow for anonymity, they allow for different forms of communication, and they allow us to represent content in ways that would be either really, really difficult or indeed impossible in the real world. And so these state-of-the-art kind of applications are the sorts of things that people have been talking about in terms of cutting-edge uses of digital technologies in education. And has led some people to suggest that education is on the brink of being transformed through learning technologies. But in the work that I do, and in a lot of the schools that I go out to work with teachers and to look at their practices in classrooms, it's actually this kind of thing that I see. And it's actually this kind of thing that I've been doing with you in lectures every single week of this semester. And what you can see in these kinds of images is the fact that the teacher is the person who's in control of the technologies. It's the teacher who's actually holding the iPad or controlling the smartboard. And there are indeed some primary school classrooms that I've been out to where the smartboard is put on the wall, and it's actually at a height where even if the teacher wanted to, he or she couldn't actually have the students using the smartboard because it's mounted too high on the wall. The students actually can't reach the top parts of the board. So the ways in which we use technologies and the ways in which technologies are set up in our schools doesn't actually allow often for these state-of-the-art kind of examples to come into play. Education is on the brink of being transformed through learning technologies, Diana Laurillard said in 2008. However, it's been on that brink for some decades now, she went on to say. And I'd argue that we could say the same thing nearly a decade later on. Indeed, there's been some research that was done back in 2011 that showed that despite the use of digital technologies in a lot of classrooms, a coherent set of innovative practices were quite rare. And the 21st century skill building opportunities offered by typical learning activities using digital technologies, well, that remained low. And if you look in the top right-hand corner of this particular slide, you'll see that this particular study was sponsored by Microsoft, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. So if they can't find something positive going on with digital technologies, well, maybe we have to question their use and the ways in which teachers in Australian context use them for inclusion purposes. And if we think about the history of educational technology, maybe some of these kinds of things shouldn't really come across as a huge surprise. Maybe a lot of these things are things that actually have been going on for quite some time. The idea of using technologies to make our lives better is certainly not a new idea. This particular drawing was done just before the turn of last century in the late 1890s, and shows how the artist conceptualized the idea of technologies helping us out with common day kinds of chores. And here we have a maid who's using this particular contraption to make life a lot easier, cleaning a particular house. The same artist actually drew this picture, and what we've got in this particular image is the teacher here, and the teacher's feeding some books into this machine. This student, who's obviously the naughty student, and he's been called out to the front of the class, is cranking the handle. The materials that are being munched up by the machine here then go up these wires and across and down to the students, who listen to the materials while they're sitting at their desks. And this particular artist thought that this is what schools would look like in the year 2000. And when you think about the use of YouTube nowadays, well, maybe that teacher wasn't terribly far off the mark after all. But I'd argue that the use of digital technologies hasn't led a digitally driven blowing up of conventional schools that Seymour Papert talked about. That there have been uses of technologies in schools, but they haven't transformed the small G grammar of school in the way that schools look and operate. So if we start to look at the use of radio, for example, radio was going to transform the way schools and schooling looked. It was going to allow students in a variety of contexts hear from people in real world settings, potentially in real time, to gain information and access to information that they wouldn't have been able to do through a book, or at least not with that kind of fidelity. And perhaps with the exception of the School of the Air, I would argue that educational radio has not transformed the way that schools look, the work that teachers do, or the ways in which students learn. Similarly, educational television was going to change the way that schools looked, allow people to represent information for students in ways that they couldn't do in live classroom settings. And so again, there are a number of different examples that we can see over the years, and some of those might be more familiar to you than others. But again, I would argue the ways in which educational technology have actually changed the way people learn have probably, I would argue, actually happened in home environments. That students, actually young people, learn in different ways in a home environment. But I think it would be a bit of a long bow to draw to say that this kind of educational technology has transformed the way that teachers go about their work, that it's changed the landscape of schools and schooling, learners and learning. And so the argument goes that if there have been examples like educational radio and educational television that haven't changed things in the past, why should anything be different with the digital landscape that we're now looking at in the future? that actually potentially what's going to happen is that a lot of these digital innovations are going to go the same way of educational radio and educational technology, and are going to simply become part of our past. And the future, well, we might have things like wearable technologies or implantable technologies, these next things that are going to come along and revolutionize the way that schools work, the ways in which we're able to represent information to students, the ways that we're able to engage and include students as part of the learning process. And Neil Selwyn, who's a professor here in our faculty, talks about this notion of a cycle of hype, hope, and disappointment. That so often we see this hype around digital technologies, that we want these things to change what is going on in classrooms, that it's going to revolutionize the way that teaching and learning takes place. And after a little while, we still hang on to hope, and we hope that if we just keep exploring and we just keep trying these things in slightly different ways, that this promised revolution is going to occur. That hope finally is replaced by disappointment when we realize that actually digital technologies or any form of technology is probably no silicon bullet and is going to solve all the problems that we hoped that it might. So here's enough of the doom and gloom, that there are some challenges associated with educational technologies. There are some issues, and there are some things that an uncritical use of digital technologies means that we have this problematic notion of the ways in which we might include their use in our classrooms, particularly for inclusion. But if you go out into schools, and many of you have just been doing that, you'll see some amazing teachers doing some unbelievable things with students. And I think that there are some things that you might want to think about that you can include thoughtfully that can get you closer to those state-of-the-art kind of examples. So I want you to think about the ways in which you conceptualize knowledge, and the ways in which you might bring about knowledge as part of what it is that you do with digital technologies, particularly for inclusion. And I want to introduce you to, again, briefly, this notion of PCK. And you'll see me there with Lee Schulman, who developed this notion of pedagogical content knowledge, where he argued that expert teachers don't just have content knowledge like content experts. He argued that the difference between a physics teacher and a physicist is that they both have great content knowledge, but the physics teacher also has great pedagogical knowledge. The great physics teacher is able to represent these often abstract, sometimes difficult to grasp concepts in ways that students are able to understand. Particular students are able to understand particular content because of particular representations that a teacher makes of that information. About 20 years after Lee came up with that in 1986, these two guys on the left at the bottom there, Punya Mishra and Matt Kaler, came up with the idea that digital technologies were becoming more ubiquitous, that actually we didn't just need this blend of pedagogical knowledge and content knowledge. We actually also needed teachers who had this understanding of technology, understanding not just which button to press to make things work, but the different affordances of forms of technology. And so they came up with the idea that teachers needed technological, pedagogical and content knowledge, or TPAC. And so they argue that great teaching occurs when teachers sit at the nexus point of these three circles, where they have this complex interplay of these different forms of knowledge, and they understand the particular context in which they're working. So if that's the kind of knowledge that you need to have to be able to use digital technologies really well, how might we apply that knowledge in different learning contexts? Well, I want to introduce you to two ideas. One is the idea of virtual reality, and the other is of augmented reality, and for you to think about ways in which you might be able to use these for inclusion. So augmented reality is one that I really want to focus on. Virtual reality is where you put on a headset and you actually aren't able to see any of the real world around you. Okay, everything that you see is virtual. Augmented reality is a little bit different. Augmented reality is this interaction of superimposed graphics, audio, or other sense enhancements, so maybe video, over a real world environment displayed in real time. So you can see the real world environment, but you also get to see additional information through the lens of something. So in this particular example, the photograph on the left hand side, you can see an engineer working with a relatively complex piece of machinery, and he's wearing a headset. On the right hand side, what you can see is what he sees through that particular headset. And so in the background, you can see the engine that he's working on, and in the foreground, you can see a digital representation of a starter motor, which is what it is that he's replacing. And it's showing the engineer where the starter motor needs to go in this particular engine. There are labels that go over the top of this, over the real engine, and this kind of technology was actually developed by Boeing, the airplane company, for their engineers working on really complex engines for what am I trying to say? For planes, for very large scale planes. We now see this a lot of the time as part of our live broadcast television experience, where we see different forms of information being overlaid on top of live footage of information that you might be able to see and take in just with your eyes, your ears, those kinds of things. So we actually augment the experience that we have in real life. And you might have heard of some examples of this. Google came out with a thing called Google Glass a number of years ago, and that's where real time information was overlaid on what the person was able to see through these glasses that they were wearing. Similarly, you might have heard of the Microsoft HoloLens. That is still in development, but it's very close to being released for public consumption, and it actually allows you to interact with different forms of digital objects in real life. So here we can see an example where Minecraft is being overlaid over someone's lounge room. And so it's not just being able to play games, not just being able to play games with that particular headset, but it's actually also being able to interact with different media and being able to actually share that media with other people wearing a HoloLens, so that you can all see different things around a real life setting like a classroom. So the potential of these things is absolutely huge. We're not quite there yet in terms of it being used in schools, and so maybe we're at the phase in Neil Selwyn's idea that there's a lot of hype around these ideas, that we hope that these might be able to bring about some really interesting changes, but we're not quite sure how that's going to work yet. What we do have, though, are some other forms of augmented reality that you can use in real time at the moment. And there are two kinds of augmented reality applications that I want to introduce you to. One of those is location-based augmented reality, and the second one is target-based augmented reality. So location-based AR is something that uses in a real-world location to then be able to present more information to you. Couple of examples of these. One is a game called geocaching, and the second one is the precursor to the Pokemon game that took over the world not so long ago, and that game was called Ingress. So if we look at geocaching, the idea with that is that people have hidden little, literally almost worthless targets, things that they want you to try and find all around the world. So this game is played all around the world, including here at Monash. And what you do is you can jump onto the geocaching website, and you can actually start to look for these little hidden treasures in different geographic locations. And then you use your mobile technology, your mobile phone or your tablet device, to go searching for these. And the idea is that there's nothing more really than the glory of actually winning, of finding some of these. There isn't a huge prize or anything other than that. It's actually just the challenge and the enjoyment of trying to find some of these geocaches in different geographic locations. And there are actually trails that can lead you. There's one I know that goes from Melbourne to Adelaide. So if you're looking for something to do in the upcoming break between semesters, geocaching might be for you. These location-based augmented experiences actually have educational applications as well. So for example, this guy works at the University of New South Wales, and I really want to meet him because he sounds like an interesting kind of a guy. He's made an augmented reality game for his students that uses location and it uses digital technologies. And the game actually encourages students to take on the role of male spiders searching for mates while avoiding predators. So it's this really niche kind of education experience in a biology course, I think it's a biology course, that students get to experience. They get to experience what are some of the challenges for male spiders through the use of an augmented reality game. We also have target-based augmented reality, and that's often a lot easier for people to come to when they start to use augmented reality in their education settings. And the idea with target-based augmented reality is that by pointing a mobile device at a particular target, then you are able to see more information on the screen than you can in the real world. And so there are a number of different applications that I'll show you one or two quick examples of in a moment that you can actually get into. One is by a company called Daqri, D-A-Q-R-I, and all of these things that I'm showing you are free, and they're available on both Android and iOS devices. So if you want to, you can have a play with these. On Moodle, you'll find that there is actually a table with links to all of the different applications that I'm about to show you and all of the targets as well. So you can have a play with these at home. So Daqri is a really interesting one in terms of biology and also chemistry and the ways in which they've actually designed educational applications for those particular areas. And so essentially what happens is you get a target that looks something like this, and you point your phone at it and you're able to see more information through the lens of the device than you are just by looking at this kind of interesting but weird image. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a few moments. I've been using this for quite some time, and it's actually been the basis of some programming that I've been had done, and I'll show you how I've been able to use that in real world settings in a little bit. But it's caught the attention of the media, and possibly I would suggest this may be adding to some of the hype that Neil talks about. Augmented reality is something that you can use, something that is not only freely available, but it's also mentioned in the Australian curriculum. So there are ideas as to how you might be able to draw on some of this stuff as part of your own practices. The easiest one for you to use if you want to create your own augmented reality experiences is Aurasma. It's free and you can actually do some amazing things when it comes to creating and sharing your own augmented reality experiences. There are a lot of really easy to follow tutorials online. So again, if you just Google Aurasma, then you'll find that with literally 2 or 3 steps, you can be starting to create your own augmented reality experiences for your students. As I said, it is a really simple thing. My suggestion would be for you to actually jump online, have a look at a YouTube tutorial on it, if this is something that's interesting for you, and you'll be up and running in no time at all. Here's an example of a student that was working with me on some augmented reality designs, and she actually used a different form of augmented reality, and it was used for safety in a design technology class in New South Wales. Essentially, this teacher was sick of having to explain all of the safety aspects of using different pieces of woodworking technology, in this case a scroll saw. And so what she did is she designed an augmented reality experience for her students so that they could get this really, really important safety information, essential safety information, but she didn't have to be drawn away from other teaching to actually go through this with students. That when it came time for them to use a particular piece of equipment, all they had to do was to point their device at this particular poster, which could be up on the wall of a classroom, and it would then guide them through how the setup, operation and maintenance of this particular piece of hardware. And so if you want to go and have a look at the unbelievable job this teacher did in terms of the design of this particular augmented reality application, then the URL for her website is just down the bottom there. What I've been doing with this kind of work is actually starting to look at the ways in which digital technologies might be able to be used in real world settings. As I mentioned, a lot of the things that I've shown you in the past have, in past slides, have been things that have been an inspiration for me and a team of people that I've been working with to develop some software for the Royal Botanic Gardens here in Melbourne. The challenge for them was to be able to represent some aspects of the Australian curriculum in ways that were engaging for young people, that were able to include people from a whole range of different backgrounds to understand some different environmental concepts, and also to be able to gain an understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives of history, culture and landscape. And so there's been a whole lot of programming that's gone on to be able to do that. And so what you'll find is that we've actually come up with a way of being able to use real trees as part of that particular process. So what you've got in this model here is what we've done for particular trees in the gardens, and each of those little white dots represents a photograph that was taken around the base of a tree. Those photographs were then stitched together to form a three-dimensional model. Those models were then manipulated so that we reduced the number of polygons in them to get line images, like you can sort of see on the left-hand side, so that we can get particular features that we can track of trees. Those features then get loaded into a model that a device can then recognize, and as soon as the device effectively sees that model in front of it, it then overlays some information over the top of that real world setting. And so what you'll find is that here's an example, and this is a very early prototype of what actually happens at the Royal Botanic Gardens. Obviously, this is the education building at Monash, and so this is just an example, as I said, of a very early prototype. And the idea with this was to be able to show students the carbon cycle, because the carbon cycle is not something you can hear, you can smell, you can touch, you can see, you can feel, and it's a concept that's often very difficult for students to understand. If we're actually able to overlay that in a real world setting, and we're able to combine that with a voiceover that explains what it is that students are seeing, then it makes life a whole lot easier for them. It makes it easier for them to be able to understand those particular concepts. And so if you imagine this is actually looking through the device of a mobile phone or tablet, as soon as the device locked onto that particular tree, then these different arrows start to get overlaid on top of the tree and explains what it is that's actually going on with this carbon cycle. You can imagine that if we then had a voiceover running over that, then we're actually able to explain things in real time to students. So it's that kind of thing that really allows us to use augmented reality in powerful ways. I'm going to finish off today by showing you one more example of augmented reality in action. So now I'd like to introduce you to the idea of augmented reality by actually showing you what it means. So I'm just going to take the camera off here, and what I want to do is I want to show you that I've got on my desk here that target that you saw a little bit earlier. And I've got my phone, so you can actually see through the phone different things in my office. When I point the phone at the piece of paper here on my desk, what you then see, he says, is a full 3D human body floating on top of that piece of paper. And I can pull back and I can look around my office and still see the body, and I can actually go in really closely and start to have a look at different parts of the human body. What I'm also then able to do is start to turn on and off different body systems. I'm able to look at the integration of those different body systems and start to take out some parts of different systems. For example, I can also use the same application for a full 3D beating version of the human heart. So there are a whole range of different things that you can do with augmented reality. As I said, I will include a full table of apps and targets that you can download free of charge, and you can have an experiment and see how you might use those different pieces of software as part of your practices to be able to include students from a range of different backgrounds as part of the learning process.